Welcome to the Frontend Coffee Break. This is episode, 19? Recorded somewhere in July. I don't know when this is going live, but it's really, really hot in Barcelona. My name is Ricardo Torres, and with me, as usual, Chucho Castañeda. How are you, sir?
Hello. As you said, it's quite hot in Barcelona, so I'm sweating for the most part. But, well, at least we have fans that can
be turned on when we are not recording. And
yes.
Right now, my AC is off, fan is off, just for you guys, the listeners. Or the viewers. Remember that we also have a YouTube channel. So if you're listening and you want to see our faces, just go to YouTube, look for Content Centric, and we are there. So what's the topic for today, Chucho?
The topic for today, it's a topic that we've talked about for some time. It's quite popular. It's mobile first development in 2023. We're just going to discuss, I think, a little bit about our experience working with mobile development, how it has evolved throughout the years, at least trying to remember a few things there. And just discuss if there's any tips or anything regarding of how we do it. That will be, I guess, for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, mobile first is something you and I have been sort of advocating and also asking in all our front-end technical interviews that we do here at Content Centric. It's always, at some point when we move from HTML to CSS, we ask, okay, tell me more about mobile first, why, and all those, yes, it's very hot, and all those things. So when somebody asks you mobile first, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Yes. Well, for me, of course, after working with this, which I only started working once I joined Cognizant Netcentric when it was back Netcentric, it's yes, please, it's the way to go.
Okay, so if I tell you, Chucho, good morning, mobile first.
Good morning.
Yes, please.
Yes, please. You give me two to go with a little bit of sugar.
Nice.
No, but what do you mean exactly about this? I mean, I think it is the way to go. If you want to have a responsive website, definitely mobile first is the first thing that you need to go. But I'm very surprised that when you ask this question, we usually get very different types of answers. One of the most typical ones that I've heard is well, it depends. Are the users using more the desktop, or are the users using more the mobile? That's usually the first people the first thing that people ask back.
And it's not an invalid answer, right?
No.
If you're working on an internet portal which has no access to the internet, your users are maybe a service center, a support center where they use only desktop devices. Sure, why invest the money on going mobile first or even testing on mobile, right? So it's not incorrect to answer that.
Well, and this is something very important that you say. Even though I said, mobile first, yes, please. It is very important that you only need to invest on this if it makes sense, as you say. It doesn't make any sense to do a mobile first or a responsive website if you know that 100% of your users are going to be using one or the other. And as a follow-up, when they tell me this, I usually say, well, imagine that 80% or 60% of your people are using the desktop and the rest are using the mobile. And usually the answer they give us is, well, desktop first.
Yeah. I don't agree. I mean, I think you got to see the trends, right? So if you see the global market usage, whatever, every year we see more and more mobile usage, right? And for me, it doesn't make sense. Even if right now your website has maybe 50-50 or 40-60, I don't care. That's going to change. I mean, the markets are going there. Everybody's going more and more phones, and third world countries, all those people are getting also mobile devices. So it makes sense to have your product or your site be more future-proof, right?
Well, yeah, and it's not really that much more of an effort to do it. And funny enough, this is something that I was reading some time ago, and people were saying or criticizing, and this might be a little bit of
polemic. I don't know.
Controversial. And they were saying, I cannot believe that this person is homeless, but still they have a phone.
It happens.
It happens. And for example, in China, if I'm not mistaken, there's some people begging on the street asking for money. And when people say, no, I don't have money, they have if I'm not mistaken, a QR code for the don't remember what is the app that
some
is
sort of online payment, right?
yeah. So that you can actually give them money through the phone. I mean, it is something that is so ubiquitous right now. Like the mobile device, as you say, the trend is that a lot of the of our web surfing is done by the phone, and even more so, it's going to be like this throughout time. So it makes sense to, unless you know that you don't need it to work on a mobile responsive website. So why would you say, Ricardo, that it's better to do a mobile first approach when first, for those that don't really know exactly what is mobile first and desktop first, what would the definition of these be?
Wow, I mean, there's so many dimensions when you say mobile first. Like I was saying you before, for me, when I hear mobile first, I don't know why, but my brain always thinks about CSS media queries, right? And I know that that's not the only thing that you gotta consider when you go mobile first, but that's what my brain thinks about. Okay, I'm gonna do my media queries in a way that first they're gonna render for mobile, and then you will say, okay, from this width onwards, upwards, you will do desktop. So in that way, you're not overwriting as much, right? You go from small to big, and really, when you compare the two code bases, it's much more easier to understand and less prone if you go mobile first. The definition, I don't know. What would you say to the definition?
Well, as you say, just the basic definition is that when you develop with the mobile, the device in this case, either whether you use mobile or desktop first, you develop first for that device or breakpoint or screen size, and then you adjust, just like a progressive enhancement philosophy, you adjust to support the other one. You make it responsive, but choosing one of the two sizes. So what this means is, for example, if you have a font that is smaller in bigger screens, then you first write the base CSS in a big font, and then you use media queries, for example, to make the font smaller the moment that you change when you have a bigger breakpoint, you have a bigger screen. So you override the original, the mobile, the definition. And when you go on a desktop first, is the other way around. You, for example, start with the definition of a small font, and then using media queries, you override that font size for the mobile device. So that would be the approach. In my experience, it's usually better for mobile first. I don't know if you've had the same experience regarding this. Like first defining the styles or whatever you're working on for a phone or a mobile device, a smaller screen, and then adjusting it to work on a bigger screen.
Yeah, I think at least for like doing the layout, for me, it feels more easier, organic to create a layout or design for mobile, and then when you just go big, it's just probably just stretching stuff rather than trying to I'm going from multiple columns to small things, rearranging elements on the page. It feels more natural to me to go mobile first, to be honest.
And not only that, it's in my experience also you write less code. Usually you need to override less things when you're going from mobile to desktop than the other way around, because there's as you say, the layouts are more complex, so you have to reset sometimes the styles to go back to the mobile, and that's basically for me the big selling point. If you need to have a responsive website, a website that adapts to the user's screen, it's better to start small, because usually it's way simpler, and then adjust as you stretch up.
So besides CSS, I mean, what else would you consider, like also thinking about mobile first? What other stuff could you do in HTML or JavaScript or other stuff that says, okay, this is a mobile first strategy or mobile first optimization?
Well, definitely JavaScript would be one of the next things that I would think of, especially because I've depending on how complex, for example, let's talk about components. Depending on how complex the components that you're working with, usually for the desktop, they tend to be way more complex. So in JavaScript, once again, you develop the most simple functions, and then when you go to mobile, you have a JavaScript that is constantly looking, let's say, or just triggers a response like, oh, you've changed what we call the breakpoints. You moved on from mobile to desktop or to tablet, and then you need to adjust some things. Although, in my experience, most of the time it's not big adjustments. But for example, menus. I'm actually currently working on a menu that is the same menu, mobile and desktop. And it behaves differently when it's one or the other. So we have basically just a trigger that the moment that it changes, you have to adjust a few things like, oh, I have to make sure that the menu is closed. Oh, I have to make sure that this is like this. You change the state, you reset the state maybe, and then hiding, showing stuff just to prepare the component to be visible in one or the other breakpoint.
You're right. Definitely having like some sort of event listeners on the page on resize or something like that. It's expensive. Like I think adding all of these events, it's expensive in terms of computing power. But yeah, if it's needed, you gotta do it. I think the better strategy would be to get in the discussion before that it's set in stone and go with the design agency and say, hey, can we just not rearrange stuff, not create new elements if it's desktop? Let's try to use the same things, but just using position, using flex, using order. You can move stuff rather easily with CSS, and you don't need as much JavaScript to do that. Definitely. I was also thinking about JavaScript in terms of, okay, maybe if you go mobile first and you're really strict, you would think about offline mode. You would think about storing stuff for the the subway or things like that. And then if you're desktop, you don't do that because you don't care about the connection because okay, it's a fiber connection.
Yeah, but this is interesting that the irony of adding, when you're going on a mobile device or you're thinking about development for mobile device, one of the most important things to take into account is performance, especially in devices, because not everyone's using a premium device. Not everyone's using the latest iPhone or Android or whatever. But most people actually don't use these devices as much as popular as they are. Most people don't use them, or if they use them, they're very old. So you have to take that into account. You have to take performance into account. And just thinking about adding additional JavaScript, in order to handle the offline mode and these kind of things, does sound a little bit counterintuitive, doesn't it?
True, right? I mean, more JavaScript means slower page loading or rendering or all those core vitals that we talked about on episode, was it 17? So yeah, but still, I mean, it's an improvement for mobile, no? I mean, you can detect if it's a slow connection, maybe rather than downloading all the images, don't download them, or have more, rather than, I don't know, stuff that happens on the background, just force it to be user interaction. If the user really clicks there or scrolls there, then we trigger some sort of download from assets rather than, having everything free for all downloading, and then it's 4 megabytes, even if it's lazy loaded, right? Because even if it's lazy loaded on mobile, you don't want to do that. People pay for gigabytes on the mobile connection, so it's not.
And how about SPAs? I mean, with Angular, React, or other frameworks, that the idea is that you download the entire application, the entire site, or the entire or most of the functionality there. It is a bigger JavaScript file, but it does handle when you click on because
lazy loading, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But they do try to make it look. And part of the things that they try to achieve with the SPAs is supposed to, especially on mobile phones, is to have this experience like a mobile app. That you have the app, and when you have the app, you have everything in the app there, and you just click and you have an immediate response, because it doesn't always go to fetch some information from internet.
Yeah, but you see right now there's this CSS transition API, which makes it look like on a website that it's like a native app or PowerPoint. Like you can just click a link and just adding a few lines of CSS, I think it's one line of CSS, and if you want to do it with JavaScript, it's just 2 lines, and then you have a full page transition, even if it's a regular pixel, but it doesn't look like it. So if you're going for mobile first, you don't have to go SPA. SPAs are not really like needed for mobile first optimization. But yeah, I get what you're saying.
Oh, and this one, I've never worked with this new, because this is something relatively new.
It's super new. I think it's not yet in stable in Chrome. It's behind the flag. Yeah.
Okay. Have you ever tried it?
Yeah. And locally, you can enable the flag and then try it out, and it's. I'm blown away by how easy it is. Really, it's just one line. I mean, if you want to do more granular approach, like, okay, let's say I have a video thumbnail, or when you click on it, it will expand to the next page. Then it's a little bit more complex. You have to actually target that element and say, hey, this is the element that's going to transition. But if you want like full page, like an SPA or a regular mobile app, one-liner, you're done. And the browser takes care of everything. It's amazing.
Well, then this is one of the things that we've over and over discussed, and it's so true that when we're working on creating whatever, websites or applications, web apps or whatever, we suddenly find ourselves in situations like, oh, I'd like to do this, but there's no natural way of doing it. So you end up doing it yourself. Like, for example, just something that comes into mind very recently, data binding and the library that you created in order to actually incorporate data binding in an easy way to any project in vanilla way. And this is something that, for example, someone said, oh, I'd love to have data binding. They create a framework with data binding, but it's like a huge thing. And right now you actually need to implement this. You need to use a library. But eventually, this is something that I think it's so essential. There's a few ways to do data binding in a natural way with JavaScript, but it's not that straightforward. And I'm still surprised that we don't have any data binding API or something like this that would be simple already. Eventually. And what I'm trying to say is that we find these uses, we find these needs when we create solutions for it, huge solutions, lazy loading being also one of them, that until fairly recently, we had to implement the lazy loading ourselves. And now you just put lazy loaded as an attribute and boom, the image is lazy loaded and it's fantastic. And this transitioning thing it's just one more example of something that people like to use, because they say, okay, you're using a phone. A lot of the things that you got are not initially. A lot of things that you use your phone with applications. I want a similar experience. Well, here you go, one-liner, and you have a
PowerPoint, basically PowerPoint. That's fantastic. So, but I think you and I are very like keen or focused or in love with like responsive design, right? We want that, and I think that's what we will go for. But you also see nowadays still lots of sites that they have another site, twin site, the sibling site with a subdomain called maybe mobile dot something or m dot something. And that's something you see that oh my goodness, what is that book? The book is called...
I'll tell you about this. Is Mobile Utility by Jacob Nielsen and Raluca Budiu. I'll tell you a little bit about it because it goes, if I'm not mistaken, if I didn't mess up my books, it goes in the direction that you're saying. Please continue.
So yes, so definitely then there are some approaches, approaches that simply, they say, okay, I'm going to have one code base that's going to be all desktop. So the main site, www.google.com. And then I'm going to have a mobile optimized version that only has the HTML for mobile, the CSS for mobile, JavaScript for mobile, but it's going to be in a subdomain, maybe m.google.com, right? And you see that I saw it yesterday with two airlines actually, and I was very surprised to see big companies with big websites choosing this approach rather than maybe monorepo with a single code base that it's optimized on the fly, let's say, with responsive design. What's your take?
Well, my take is that originally I was reading. I'm a big fan of Jacob Nielsen, and I've read. I have a bit of a love for usability and UX and so on and so forth for many years. Right now, of course, I do not work on that. But it's something like I wouldn't call it a guilty pleasure, but it is something that I love to do. I just love usability. And I remember that many years ago, I've been buying a couple of books of his and talking about mobile, precisely about the feature of mobile usability and this kind of things. And one thing that caught my attention, it was that at one point he was saying, I would need to go back and reread it to get the entire thing fresh. But one thing that he was saying is that he thought that the best strategy that you could have would have precisely a mobile-only dedicated website, because that would give you the best UX experience. Why? Because you have very limited, real estate in your screen. So you have to use it the best way possible. And sometimes, although the idea behind a phone and a desktop version should be that you should be able to do more or less the same things, you're very limited by the phone, and you shouldn't just add all the things that you have in the desktop. And the best way to provide this experience would be, without making it too complex, would be to have a mobile dedicated website that only do things that you need to do in the mobile or simplifies it for the mobile. And then you have the big desktop site that is way more complex, that you have all the bells and whistles and you work on that. That he said that if I remember correctly, the idea would be to go in this direction. On the downside, you have the problem that you have to support or maintain two different websites, and that is expensive. And that's one of the things that he said, okay, it's expensive. You have the money because that you can maintain both, go for it. But if not, then you should only go for the responsive version. And as you say, there's companies that take this into heart. Google itself at one point, I don't know right now if they do it anymore because I haven't looked at it. But if you look in Google, if you were using a mobile phone, you were on if I'm not mistaken, a mobile version of Google. And
right,
it was
rather
like
than desktop, yeah. I mean, definitely, I'm with you that performance-wise, surely it's more performant to have a dedicated site where you are only shipping to the client the only essentials for the mobile, right? So
Yes.
that's definitely better, smaller payload, faster rendering, all those things. But then, when it comes to development, I'm thinking the cost is exponential, right? I mean, you got to develop. It depends. I mean, if the requirement is I want a one-to-one, I want to have the same functionality mobile and desktop, maybe that's a mistake, and you gotta perhaps choose responsive. But then if the components are way simpler, the business logic is way simpler, maybe in mobile you don't have as much, as much features, maybe it makes sense. But still, I think from a developer point of view, my development point of view, it will be complicated, right? To have two code bases perhaps,
Yes.
share logic in between them, maybe share packages. I don't know how would you do it exactly, but feels like a challenge.
It is, but I find it very interesting. It would be very nice to set up a base or the architecture that would allow you to create a project in which you have the mobile version, the desktop dedicated version, and you can easily work on it. Just doing a quick thought about it. Maybe you could even, for example, do a responsive website that separates the CSS to mobile and desktop. And for the mobile version, it only serves the mobile version. And maybe the templates that render the content, it's only mobile template. I mean, this is, for example, something that you can do with AM. You can create two different templates. You can use the desktop template to fill up the content. And then when the user arrives to your website, you can determine, okay, are they on mobile or are they on desktop? I'm going to choose one of the two, which is going to send a template with the same content, but rendering different, the rendering differently. Maybe it's way simpler or whatever. But I think it's an interesting challenge. And but as you say, I'm working on a project that we have, I don't know, 10% of the code is the same in both projects, and we're struggling we want to keep it separate. Like, no, we cannot keep it separately because it's just duplicate the code and maintaining.
Two times now, you fix the defect, you fix it twice. I was reading on it on Google developers' website to see if that's an anti-pattern. I thought it was. They would recommend responsive, but no. Turns out they say it's fine. I mean, you could do that, right? I mean, they do say they have a mobile-first indexing. So, given a mobile first approach or a mobile view of your website is really important for Google nowadays. So think about that. But they highlight that you got to be careful with duplicated content and how do you maintain both content. So I think on the SEO perspective, maybe it's a little bit harder to have an m dot something and then a main domain, two domains for serving similar content or same thing. So think about it if you need ranking.
Oof. Yeah. Well, the horrible SEO.
But sometimes, I mean, if it's your main source of income of users, you gotta think about
Definitely.
it. I mean, if it's a private site or a dashboard, maybe it's not so important. But
the one of the way that it feels sometimes when you're doing developing, I think that developing is a form of art in a way. I do think, yeah. And when we do web development, we want to do fine art. You want to do it well, And sometimes doing it well includes removing all the things that Google wants you to add.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I consider myself an artist when I paint it in a perfectly purple color. And I know it's going to be, the perfect RGBA numbers are there and it's going to be sharp. It's going to be nice. No JPEGs, just, just kidding. Maybe, sure. I mean, code is poetry, that they say. So yeah.
I completely agree. Now, I would like to when we were talking about this topic, one of the things that came into mind is the first time that I found or heard about. It wasn't called mobile first, if I'm not mistaken. It was just called responsive design, and it's an article that came. I'm really surprised now reading it. It's like I just feel so old. 13 years ago, May 25th of 2010, the article is by Ethan Marcotte. hope that I pronounced the last name well. It's called Responsive Web Design, and it's in a great website which is called A List Apart, that has a lot of fantastic articles. But this one he was just explaining. This is the first time, I think, if I'm not mistaken, this was, or at least for me, it was the first time that I read something regarding on, well, you can use the media queries in order to create you create your website this way, and then when you have when you go for over this width, you change it. And just like, for example, I think if I'm not mistaken, it's like when you have the CSS for the page, and then you have the CSS for the print version, which is something that we don't do very often, but you do have the two CSSs. And the same thing you say, you have the CSS for narrow screens, and then you have a CSS for wider screens. And I think it was the first article that I ever read. Didn't get to use any of this information until much later, because the websites that I was working on back then weren't very responsive. Well, actually not responsive at all. But it was the first time. It was a very interesting read. I'm going over it a little bit. I'm just seeing things like CSS2, which looks so far away now. Yeah, since the days of CSS 2.1, our style sheets have enjoyed...
2.0, okay. I didn't know what you were referring to, CSS2. All right.
Sorry.
In my case, I don't remember exactly the date, but I remember for a company I worked for, we had the regular web store we did, and it was just full desktop. And I remember at some point we said, oh, hold on, we gotta also try to do this on a mobile version, sort of responsive. And then since we already had the desktop side live, we simply went the desktop first approach and added media queries to fix stuff on the smaller devices. But that was like the starting point for the future projects. And then on the future projects, we really started doing mobile first from that point onwards. And yeah, it was a good change. I don't remember the year, but yeah, quite a change.
Is there any tips that you would do for people that are doing a mobile first approach? I can give one that I've learned, not the hard way, but just when you were saying this, the desktop that you adapted to mobile. Although mobile first it's a very nice idea that you always write all the styles that you need for mobile and then adapt for the desktop. That is not 100% necessarily the way that you have to go. I've been in more than one situation where you have to, if you do go mobile first, you would have to overwrite a lot. So you can always, for example, have these exceptions in which, although I always go mobile first, sometimes when I know that if I go mobile first, I'm going to have to overwrite a lot of the things for mobile, then I have a breakpoint or media query that says, if it's only mobile, then you add this so that you don't have to overwrite. That would be just like one tip.
Yeah, that's cheating. Okay, that's cheating. I think probably not in those scenarios. Probably it's that maybe the designer's fault, where they didn't really account for, okay, what I'm going to show in the mobile device, a mobile screen, and then what I'm going to show in the desktop is way more boxes, way more menus, way more links. So that's also like maybe a mistake on the component, right? Rather than just reusing what you have, like inventing new stuff for the desktop or vice versa. So yeah, you end up. Okay, okay, yes, sure. If you save more CSS, I'm with you. You can do an exception there. Approved.
And I don't know if there's any tip that you'd like, or something that you learned the hard way that you'd like to share before we finish.
I don't know. I remember pull requests, my pull requests being declined because they were not mobile first, and I learned the hard way how to do it. But no, I think just learn, go to MDN, learn what it is, use the best and that's it. All right, thumbs up, Chucho. Anything else?
No. Just I hope that your July or June is not, or August is not as hot.
It's gonna be everywhere in the world, unless you live in Finland. But yeah, thank you so much for listening, guys. We'll see you in the next Frontend Coffee Break.
Bye.